The first crack of glass woke me from a dead sleep. A second later, smoke alarms screamed through the cabin, and flames licked up the curtains by the window. I stumbled out of bed, coughing, only to see shadows moving outside, men in mismatched uniforms, badges that gleamed strangely under the firelight, storming across my porch with crowbars and rifles. The biggest shadow among them was unmistakable. Even in the chaos, I knew her. Karen, the HOA president, her round figure planted in the middle of it all, arms crossed, face smug as hell, watching my home burn like she had finally achieved the victory she always dreamed of. "This is what happens when you defy me," she shouted over the roar of fire and splintering wood. "You refused our authority, so we've taken matters into our own hands." She gestured to the men, who kicked down my door and poured accelerant across the floorboards. One lit a flare, tossed it inside, and suddenly my cabin, the one my grandfather built, the one I had restored with my own hands, was an inferno. I ran out the back door, heart hammering, and circled through the trees to get a better look. What I saw made my blood run cold. These weren't real officers. Their uniforms didn't match, their patches were crooked. Their vehicles were cheap black SUVs with no official markings. They were imposter-shired muscle, disguised as cops, working at Karen's command. And Karen, red-faced and sweating under the moonlight, stood tall as if she were leading a military campaign. Neighbors lined the lake's edge, horrified, filming with their phones, their whispers carrying, "Are those real cops? She hired fakes. She's burning him out." My cabin groaned as flames devoured it, smoke billowing into the night sky. Rage burned hotter than the fire inside me. She thought she could erase me, erase my history, by brute force and lies. But what she hadn't counted on was that someone else had been watching too. The sound of sirens cut through the chaos. Not the weak imitation from Karen's SUVs, but the sharp, bone-deep wail of real law enforcement. Within minutes, a convoy of armored vehicles rolled in, lights flashing, tires grinding against gravel. Out stepped SWAT Commander Mitchell, a man I'd served alongside years ago in Afghanistan, his presence radiating authority like steel. He barked orders, and in seconds the imposters were surrounded, their weapons stripped away, their fake badges ripped from their chests. Karen's smirk cracked. "Wait, no. They're with me. I authorized this," she shrieked, her voice wobbling between arrogance and panic. "We were enforcing HOA law." Mitchell turned his cold eyes on her, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "Lady, HOA law doesn't exist when it comes to arson, impersonation of law enforcement, and domestic terrorism." He pointed at the flames. "You've just crossed into federal crime territory." Neighbors gasped. Some cheered. Phones recorded every second. Karen tried to run, her bulk wobbling as she stumbled toward her SUV. But two SWAT officers tackled her to the ground, pinning her as she screamed. Her fake cops were cuffed one by one, their faces pale as the reality sank in. The crowd roared justice had arrived. And as I stood in the shadows, watching the inferno consume what was mine, I felt no defeat. Because in that moment, the world finally saw Karen for who she really was. She hadn't just been a bully with a clipboard, she had escalated into a criminal willing to burn lives down for power. And this time, there was no hiding, no twisting the truth. The night Karen was dragged screaming into the back of an armored truck should have been the end of it. But in truth, it was only the beginning of the reckoning. The flames of my cabin still glowed against the lake as the last imposter cop was cuffed and shoved into custody. Commander Mitchell put a heavy hand on my shoulder, the way he had years ago when our squad walked away from battle zones we weren't sure we'd survive. "She went too far, brother," he said, his voice low but certain. "Now it's our turn." Investigators swarmed the ruins by morning. They sifted through scorched beams and blackened stone, collecting samples of accelerant, photographing Karen's fake police vehicles, and cataloging every piece of counterfeit gear. Neighbors lined the road, their faces lit with a mix of shock and vindication. They whispered about how they'd feared Karen for years, how she fined them for flags, threatened them over lawn chairs, and acted like her HOA charter was federal law. Now they saw her for what she was: a fraud, an arsonist, a criminal with delusions of power. The trial became the biggest event our county had seen in decades. Media vans lined the courthouse square, cameras rolled 24/7, and national news anchors described Karen as the HOA tyrant who staged a fake police raid. She was escorted inside in shackles, her once gaudy floral wardrobe replaced by the beige monotony of prison issue. She tried to hold her chin high, but her face betrayed Hera, trembling jaw, darting eyes, sweat shining under courtroom lights. The prosecution's case was airtight. They showed video footage of her barking orders as my cabin burned, neighbors' recordings of her shouting, "This is what happens when you defy me," and the fake badges ripped straight from her imposter squad. Expert witnesses testified that the SUVs had no legitimate markings, the weapons were illegal modifications, and the so-called uniforms were nothing but stitched-together costumes. And then they played the bodycam footage from Commander Mitchell's SWAT team, capturing the moment he told her she was under arrest for impersonation, arson, and domestic terrorism. Karen tried to spin it. When her turn came, she waddled to the stand, voice high and theatrical. "I was protecting the community. His cabin was unsafe, unregistered, and a threat to property values. If the government wouldn't act, then I had to." She pointed at me, her fat finger shaking with fury. "He's the criminal here defying HOA law, mocking authority, refusing to pay for community standards." But the courtroom only murmured with disbelief. The prosecutor let her rant, then quietly rolled out the stack of fraudulent HOA notices she had mailed to neighbors' phony dues. Fake upgrades, false threats of foreclosure. Each one was tied directly to her personal bank account. The jury's faces hardened with every new revelation. The twist came when one of her own fake officers agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. A young man barely out of his 20s, eyes hollow, admitted Karen had paid them cash under the table, promised them official authority, and told them they'd never face consequences because she controlled the cops. His voice cracked when he said, "I thought she was legit. I thought HOAs had more power than police. I didn't know until SWAT showed up." The jury's jaws tightened. The damage was done. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. Fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, arson, harassment, extortion. The judge's words carried through the hushed room like a bell tolling. "Mrs. Whitmore, your actions were not misguided leadership. They were crimes against your neighbors, your community, and the very laws of this country. You stand convicted not only of destruction but of betrayal. This court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, restitution for the property destroyed, and a permanent ban from serving in any organization of public authority." The gavel cracked, and with it, Karen's empire shattered. She screamed, her body shaking, her voice shrill. "No, I am the HOA, you can't do this to me. I am the law." But deputies hauled her away, her protests drowned out by the sound of applause. The entire gallery stood and clapped, tears shining in some eyes, cheers breaking from others. It was the release of years of fear, finally cut loose in one cathartic wave. The aftermath was profound. The state dissolved Karen's HOA entirely, citing corruption, fraud, and abuse. In its place, neighbors voted to form a cooperative council, voluntary, transparent, without the power to fine or threaten. People painted their homes bright colors, planted gardens that once would have drawn citations, and rebuilt bonds long poisoned by Karen's reign. Children biked along the lake road without parents looking nervously over their shoulders. Veterans in the area were honored at a new memorial, funded by the restitution money seized from Karen's accounts. And my cabin? Rebuilt. Not overnight, but piece by piece, plank by plank, with neighbors showing up on weekends to swing hammers, paint walls, and bring food. Commander Mitchell himself stood beside me the day we raised the new beam, his hands steady on the rope, his voice saying, "You lost a cabin, but you gained a community." He was right. What Karen tried to burn down had only made us stronger. The night it was finished, I stood on the porch, the lake glittering under a silver moon, and thought about everything that had happened. The fake cops, the flames, the governor's fury, the judge's gavel, Karen's shrieks echoing through the courthouse as the truth swallowed her whole. And I realized something simple but powerful. Lies always collapse under the weight of truth, and tyranny always crumbles when people refuse to be silent. So I ask you, if someone like Karen stormed into your life, waving fake authority and threatening everything you built, would you bow your head and hope the storm passed? Or would you stand, even if it meant facing fire because the truth was worth it? Because in the end, justice doesn't come from titles or bluster. It comes from courage. And courage, once lit, spreads faster than any fire.